He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands.
And welcome back to an episode of Ministry Truth. I am your number one. Oh, you know what's funny, Bat Mom? Hold on. Look, I've had him for about a week. Welcome back to an episode of Ministry Truth. I'm your number one host on this show. Got a little bit for you today about, well, theaters, asylums, and I forgot what the other one was. And bears, oh my. Anyway, before we get into this, I got to get a message from our sponsors. Well, my sponsor. I don't really have a sponsor. I just think it's funny. So we're going to get to our sponsor, and I hope y'all enjoy.
When it comes to the things you love most, is your weight getting in the way? Are your favorite indulgences followed by needless feelings of crippling guilt? Do you find yourself not getting the same joy from your once favorite pastimes? It may not be your fault. You may be suffering from chronic mild to moderate fatness, but you're not alone. It is estimated that 50 to 65% of Americans suffer from moderate to severe fatness. The good news is, lorcaserin can help. In a recent clinical trial, lorcaserin reduced fatness and its symptoms by over 50% compared with placebo, along with improved weight loss, BMI, as well as other auxiliary health parameters. So ask your doctor today. Side effects may include a continued lack of discipline, inflated sense of self-esteem, poor eating habits, rebound weight gain, future diabetes, phantom neuropathy, and feminism. Do not take lorcaserin if you are pregnant, may become pregnant, or are thinking about pregnancy and or the continuation of your bloodline at all. Lorcaserin, so you can be at your best.
Join Mug Club today for 89.
So that was that was a message from the sponsors. Okay, I think it's funny. Fuck you guys, sensitive ass people. Can I say that? Can I say that in this channel? Don't give a shit. Got a little bit of news. I believe this is from South Florida. I came across this yesterday. It has nothing to do with the video I'm going to talk about today, but I thought it would be great information. Because what happens when a psychologist is a pedophile? Feel attacked all you want, Bat Mom.
Right now at 6, we begin with the Local 10 News Safety Alert. A Miami-Dade school's psychologist arrested and accused of heinous acts. Investigators say he sent out videos that show children engaging in sex acts.
And when police arrived at his home, he barricaded himself inside a bathroom. Let's get right to Local 10's Leanne Motojon live in Southwest Miami-Dade with the disturbing details. Leanne.
We're talking about a child psychologist accused of possessing and distributing child porn. The raid that resulted in his arrest took place at the home right behind me. The school district says he is now fired.
Good morning, Mr. Turner.
62-year-old Robert Lee Turner appearing in bond court Tuesday, visibly injured and wearing a safety smock. He's charged with 2 counts of distributing child pornography, 5 counts of possessing child porn, and 2 counts of resisting arrest. What's even more disturbing, Turner is a child psychologist specializing in patients with autism and was recently employed by Miami-Dade Public Schools.
He was working with special needs kids, including kids with autism.
Miami-Dade police say they received a cyber tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children submitted by Instagram. Turner is accused of sending 2 videos to 50 users using his account Dr. Robert L. Turner, an account that has since been deleted by Meta. The same account allegedly contained 5 images and videos of children, the descriptions of which are too disturbing and graphic for television. Police say he described one of those videos in a comment as yummy. On Wednesday, Tuesday, police served a search warrant at his house, the signs of which are still evident by the broken front door. Police say Turner tried resisting arrest by hiding in a bathroom and prevented his hands from being cuffed. Police say he admitted the account was his to viewing child porn and even identified one of the images.
No unsupervised contact with any minor children.
Through the window of this vehicle parked outside Turner's home, we can see this Miami-Dade school's exceptional student sweater. The district tells Local 10 Turner was employed with them since 2017, and while he was not assigned to any one specific school, he was sent to schools throughout the district as needed. MDCPS calls the allegations against Turner disturbing and says he's been terminated and will never again be employed by the district.
Terminated, or they're going to be like everyone else and just move them like the Catholic Church does. Oh, sick motherfuckers like that. And he dealt with kids, not just normal kids, kids with special needs. You know, a population that is very abused, so to speak, because a lot of them don't talk or they won't talk.
Right.
It's not hard to see why when you're a psychologist and you're scaring the kids like, hey, if you say something, then you never know what's happened. They're not going to believe you or this. But you fucked up by sending the images on Instagram, you stupid fuck. And I hope you get ass raped every single fucking day you're in jail for the rest of your life. Even if you aren't in jail, ass raping will still work. Can I'm allowed to say raping when it comes to pedophiles getting raped in the ass? Because fuck it. Fuck those guys. Anyway. Next topic. We're going to talk about theaters, the occult, and how they used motion picture places back in the day to help spread their mind control. And as you can see, the mind control thing still works very, very well. Because people are too fucking stupid to see it, or they don't want to see it, or they just think it's going to go away. I really lost track of what I was talking about. Anyway, let's talk about mental conditioning. I keep hitting the wrong button, guys. So it was either this guy or John Levy. John Levy, that motherfucker was dry. I was trying to watch the video I wanted to do this morning on him, and I was falling asleep.
Hey guys, hope everybody's enjoying their summer. We're trying to balance between being more frequent with the videos and also completing some other projects that we've been working on, but we're going to put a pause on that so that we can deliver some more content. We got something about to come out that we're really excited to announce, but it's not quite ready yet. In the meantime, we're rolling out a little multi-part series, not too long, but a little suspense never hurt anyone. So consider this video the overture. We're about to delve into an alternative viewpoint of film history that's rarely explored. Our curiosity was piqued by the inconsistencies surrounding Alice Guy's films, where even Guy herself seemed unsure about her first film. Discrepancies and contradictions abound in these lost films. Take for instance that it's stated that more than 80% of the original silent era films have vanished, and before 1929, over 90% were lost forever. The reasons given? Film preservation difficulties, fires, studio bankruptcy leading to sudden disappearances, or studios remaking films and destroying earlier versions. But perhaps there's something more occult or hidden going on here. Film historians, while specialists in their field, often overlook the occult symbolism or the involvement of secret societies in these early studios. The vast majority of remaining silent films are rife with occult symbolism, an area in dire need of research. While researching for a certain lost film, which we'll dive deeper into in our next video, we stumbled upon an interesting reoccurring pattern. Before we can break that down, let's explore a mind-boggling premise.
Alright.
Theaters are not just entertainment venues, they're occult mental programming machines, and to a further extent, initiation rituals. Sounds like the usual Freemason conspiracy theory, right? But hold on to your skepticism for a bit. Our entire societal structure can be
Hold on
viewed
to
as
my
a
tinfoil hat.
Freemasonic ritual. It starts with elementary school, where we learn the elements, magic, and spelling, moving on into middle school, the 3 grades, the middle pillar, and culminates in high school, the zenith of the process. There's another initiation deeply ingrained in nearly every city and state in America. Remember the Oddfellows video?
Yep.
Most people equate secret societies only with Freemasons. However, there are many different clubs out there. The Oddfellows and Freemasonic lodges dot every downtown. While each town has its own narrative about the establishment of these lodges, there's never been a clear explanation as to why they're so widespread.
Oh fuck, we have one in the next town
This
over.
facet of history remains untouched by mainstream researchers, pushing it into the realm of alternative history. Just as Oddfellow lodges and orphanages are a common sight across American cities, there's another enigma awaiting to be unveiled: the mystery of ISIS theaters. During the early 1900s, coinciding with the rise of film studios capable of producing short movies, a surge of theaters emerged across America. What's peculiar is that in a substantial number of towns, the first theater was an ISIS theater, a recurring pattern that's hard to overlook. Contrary to what one might think, ISIS theater isn't a chain like Macy's, for which historical records are easily available. Try looking up ISIS theater history or ISIS cinema, and you'll encounter a fragmented collection of individual histories for each town, with the most detailed one being about the downtown Fort Worth location in Texas. Interestingly, none of these accounts mention the existence of ISIS theaters in other towns, giving an impression of exclusivity which is far from reality. A glance at the history of cinema in the United States on Wiki doesn't mention ISIS theater at all, which raises eyebrows considering their prevalence in numerous states. It's as if this is a piece of history that has been deliberately omitted or forgotten. Strangely, Wiki says that the first permanent motion picture theater was Tally's Electric Theater in Los Angeles in 1902.
Was it?
But evidence suggests that ISIS theaters predate this, with one in Victor, Colorado as early as 1899. What they will say is that the first cinema chain is Warenberg Theaters, first set up in 1906 with the opening of the Cherokee Theater in St. Louis, Missouri by former blacksmith Fred Warenberg. Now that's an interesting story on its own, and we've seen this use of blacksmith many times in the past, as with the Charleston video, but the whole story is that Fred went to the World's Fair and saw something that changed his life. He was just a one-time blacksmith, saloon, grocery, butcher shop owner, inspired by a simple film clip of passengers on a train, who then decides to purchase a bakery and transform it into a movie theater.
Oh.
One can't help but wonder, what was this film really about? There's more to that story, but I just bring it up to show you this is what Wiki and mainstream history says is the first cinema chain. So we know there's a lack of information. These ISIS theaters were a crucial part of many cities, even small towns. Why is there not more information on them? Interestingly, when doing research for Pensacola, I remember seeing that there was this ISIS theater in this old picture book. Moon and I both thought that it was very strange that there was an old theater in Pensacola called ISIS Theater,
You stole it?
but we never really investigated it any further. It wasn't until later, after connecting it with lost films and alternative film history, that it became clear there was something to this whole mystery. For those wondering why ISIS comes across as an odd choice of name, we're not referring to any modern day groups bearing the name ISIS. Rather, we're pointing to what seems to be a distinct reference to Freemasonry. As we'll explain shortly, ISIS is an integral part of initiation ceremonies and Masonic practices. Well, let's begin our exploration with Pensacola because the situation there is genuinely puzzling. When we search for the oldest cinema theater in Florida, results are surprisingly sparse. The earliest contenders appear to be the Florida Theater and the Sunray Cinema, both in Jacksonville, Florida, with nothing documented before 1920.
I mean, we did have them defeated.
Sunray holds the reputation of being the earliest cinema to showcase talking pictures or synchronized sound, a claim that I believe is still open to debate. When you look up the earliest Pensacola cinema or movie theater, nothing significant appears. Notably, ISIS Theater won't show up unless you already know about it. That may change in the future, but as of now, the first result from Pensapedia points to Florida Theater, akin to Jacksonville's, but this one dates back to 1939. However, the credibility of these dates is suspect since many of these buildings reportedly underwent renovations,
Or
relocations, or conversions from an existing business or structure into a theater. Let's take a closer look at Pensacola. Most locals would know about the Sanger Theater, the city's most iconic theater, right at the heart of downtown and opened in 1925. Yet, the ISIS Theater was opening over a decade earlier. It's even considered the sister theater and was supposedly owned by the Sanger Amusement Company.
Sanger?
However, this acquisition didn't happen until 1935. So what was ISIS Theater before this? As per Pensapedia, it was a movie theater built in 1913. This would make it the oldest theater in Pensacola, preceding both Sanger and Rex, and it wasn't even for plays, it was for movies. In this old photo, you can see that they even had synchronized music. You can also spot a trolley advertisement for Scaramouche, a 2-hour movie from 1923, dramatizing the societal and class tensions leading to a French Revolution. And guess where the ISIS Theater was located? Right in front of the Freemason building in Pensacola, on Garden and Palafox. While this alone doesn't confirm the theater's Freemasonic affiliation, it's noteworthy, especially considering the Freemason building is among the oldest downtown Pensacola structures. Yet again, why such scant information? This was the first theater, yet it doesn't appear when searching.
Tried to remodel it. So you have that old red brick that I like to talk about. That's early 1900s, late 1850s. We have a part of downtown Clarksville. Kind of looks like this street, but it's not. That you see a lot of red brick, and then you can see how they built in front of it. Or if you look at them, it's not red brick, but it's more like rocks with mortar in them.
Such scant information. This was the first theater, yet it doesn't appear when searching for the oldest theater in Pensacola. So is this unknown, lost history? Or is it suppressed history? Let's now delve into the extensive list of ISIS theaters, as their prevalence is quite remarkable. Strangely, not many appear on Google Maps, likely due to their diminished existence, which also means they don't often feature in the top search results. However, a basic Google search for ISIS theaters will yield about 10 different ones, each possessing a unique history that seems disconnected from the others. Among the ones that typically appear include Fort Worth, Texas, home to an ISIS theater dating back to 1914. Aspen, Colorado hosts an ISIS theater from 1912. Victor, Colorado also had an ISIS theater as far back as 1899. Winnemac, Indiana has an ISIS theater established in 1936. Crete, Nebraska, a 1926 ISIS theater, notably the first building with AC. The history page intriguingly concedes that the ISIS theaters are named after the Egyptian goddess Isis, leaving no doubt about the name's origin. The city had a population of only 2,000 in 1920. One might wonder why such a small town needed an ISIS theater. Asheville, North Carolina, home to an ISIS theater from 1937.
Also the Biltmore.
These particular ones are more prominent because they're still in use. For instance, the lesser-known Pensacola ISIS theater does not appear in searches unless one is already familiar with its history. Well, here is a more detailed list of ISIS theaters. Toledo, Colorado. The theater was opened around 1937. It was renamed ISIS Theater and was listed in the 1941 and 1943 editions of Film Daily Yearbook as closed, and it was operated by the Atlas Theater Corp chain. It had reopened by 1950. Denver, Colorado, 1913. In 1953, it was briefly renamed New State Theater. Fort Worth, Texas, 1914. The theater, designed by Louis B. Wayman, had 400 seats, one screen, a pharmacy, and 12 rooms
that's the one
upstairs.
I found out was really fucking weird. What the fuck is a pharmacy doing in a theater? Are you gonna be like watching a fucking movie and be like, oh my god, I got a headache. Let me head over to the pharmacy.
Houston,
Fuck your
Texas,
popcorn. I want
1912.
drugs.
Gainesville, Texas, 1915. Salt Lake City, 1908. Glendale, Montana, 1914. Arnold, Nebraska, 1924. Which is weird because the population today is like 500. Same thing in Broadwater, Nebraska, 1916. Augusta, Kansas, 1913. McPherson, Kansas, 1909. Seattle, Washington, opened up sometime before 1914. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1920s. Could see over 800 people, but no photos of the place exist. Deming, New Mexico, 1918. Independence, Oregon, unknown date. Portland, Oregon, 1909.
Yeah, it's weird to find
Medford,
a lot of these
Oregon,
on the West
1910.
Coast.
Oklahoma City, 1921. Kansas City, Missouri, 1918. Roanoke, Virginia, 1917. Lynchburg, Virginia,
I like that.
1916. Grand Rapids, Michigan, 1916. From the St. Paul, Minnesota 1916 newspaper, he talks about the ISIS theater receiving multiple donations, but doesn't specify where it's located. Interestingly, there is a 1916 theater in St. Paul called the
RKO.
Palace Theater or the RKO Orpheum. Minneapolis, Minnesota, 1909.
I wonder if that burned down.
Fargo, North Dakota, 1913. There's some interesting Glendive, Montana newspapers from 1914. Something strange about a Master Key show in the last days of Pompeii. So, why are they talking about Pompeii? Interestingly, ISIS Theater was advertised in the 1917 Juneau newspaper from Alaska. Kind of strange when you think about it. St. John's, Arizona, 1914. Nogales, Arizona, 1913. And it's difficult to say whether there was one in Phoenix or not. From the Prescott Weekly,
Yeah, for a
Arizona,
while,
1905.
when I was waiting for him to list off these names, I was like, wait a second. I thought the Birdcage was going to be on there, but guess not. Birdcage, Tombstone. All right.
There's an article on the ISIS Theater in Tent City. It's not clear exactly where this may be, but seems there were multiple ISIS theaters in Arizona. Lawrence, Arizona, 1923. San Bernardino, California, 1914. Balboa, California. Ontario, California. Even Los Angeles, 1911. But one of the most intriguing examples of ISIS theaters is found in San Diego. This theater, seemingly one of the largest and possibly
Still got a
oldest,
steeple on it.
is referenced frequently in historical newspapers across various states. Initially opened as the Fisher Opera House in 1892, it was subsequently transformed into an ISIS theater in 1902. From the University of Toledo, there's a picture of an interior of the ISIS theater from this era that seems to be a rare find. It says that it's in Point Loma, California, and no exact date, but between 1896 and 1929, and this kind of exposes the
Cali
whole
people, have
thing.
you ever heard of these theaters?
The description calls it a theosophical theater, an occult theater,
Well, fuck you, Colorado
occult
people.
revival.
Both.
And look at the interior and how fancy this is. Look at the size of the screen. It's all pretty impressive. But wait, so these theaters are occult then? There's more to cover. Panama City, Florida. Orlando, Florida. Boise, Idaho, 1912. Peru and Noblesville, Indiana, around 1914. Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1913.
No lie though,
Indianapolis.
Indiana seems to be a fucking hot spot. So you got Indianapolis. There's a bunch of other places that are just weird in Indiana that make no sense. That seem, how do I say this? Native American folklore.
1910, which features a peacock-looking building. Des Moines, Iowa, 1914. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 1913. Hamilton County, Iowa, 1911. Interestingly, the backstory here says that it was started by two men, F.L. Freely and H.L. Wise, that these were the men who chose the name ISIS, But that seems just like a cover story because
Yeah.
there were many more before this. Marion, Illinois, started by a coal miner in 1916. So this is the last one, but supposedly there's one in Chicago, but it's sort of a mystery. There's zero information on it online, but there's a newspaper article. This is pretty mind-blowing. From 1926, quote, New ISIS theater planned for heart of large territory. Ada and 69th Street site brought 48,000 from Movie Palace Building Corporation. There's probably no district in Chicago so thickly populated as the immediate neighborhood of 69th and Ada Streets that lacks amusement facilities as does the community in which the ISIS Theater and Building Corporation will erect its 750,000, 1,800-seat theater and office building.
Damn.
When completed, the new theater on the southeast corner of 69th and Ada Streets will be operated by the ISIS interest or turned over to one of the large theater corporations now operating in Chicago, according to W.J. McDonnell, who represented both parties in the transfer of the property. The site was purchased for a reported price of $8,000.
Shit.
Z. Errol Smith has been secured as the architect to draw plans for the theater and the 15 apartments, 7 stores, and 4 offices which will occupy the building. The theater, both as to exterior and interior finish, has been designed in the Egyptian style, following closely the original model of the temple to the goddess Isis on the island of Philae above the first cataract of the Nile.
So one of the many theories that some of us have, I don't know about people here, but might have heard it before, but they believe Old World, Arizona, New Mexico, that little area is actually Egypt. And they have done expeditions in the Grand Canyon where they would find these caves with Egyptian artifacts.
The temple was first built by Nekhennef, the last of the native Egyptian kings, about the year 350 BC. The Roman Emperor Justinian closed its altars in the 6th century AD.
But I tell you what, I showed Batmom this earlier. I have the batteries. Huh? I've had them for about a week, but I'm not doing shit.
But the crazy thing is that they feature an artist rendering of what it's supposed to look like. And to me, it looks like old Photoshop.
So, what do you want to talk about?
You can even see that the sign is slightly cut off. Why would they feature this, even secure an architect? There doesn't seem to be any more info on this ISIS theater other than this newspaper article. But notice how cold it looks.
Oh, my bad.
Like some Egyptian temple.
I just closed the door, so hopefully...
And there are many more ISIS theaters. Not every one of them is on a catalog, and sometimes the newspapers are the only source for info on these theaters. You would think in a time where they were showing cinema as new technology that they would have a solid historical record of these theaters, but we really don't. Almost every ISIS theater on this list is shrouded in mystery or very few details exist. Just to clarify, this isn't to suggest that ISIS theaters were the sole purveyors of occult themes in theaters or that there were no other theaters during this era. Certainly, many supposedly competing theaters existed in various cities. Some early cinema books even described this, showing other theaters that exhibited similar occult or royal symbols. One such instance seems to be a variant of the ISIS theater named the Iris Theater. It appears to be the same entity but tweaked slightly to create an illusion of competition because, interestingly, Iris Theater bears a striking resemblance to ISIS theaters. Before delving into the significance of all this, it's crucial to recognize that ISIS theaters were, in most instances,
those archways,
the first or earliest cinema theaters in the United States.
Something about them.
However, it remains unexplained why these theaters sprouted up in so many different cities, especially smaller towns with relatively low population counts. Some of these theaters could accommodate hundreds of people. It raises the question, were entire towns attending these movies? Interestingly, the book Landscape Architecture in the Modern World from 1941 references the ISIS theater. It is listed as number 66.
Oh.
Quote, sponsors of the ISIS theater in Point Loma assert that it was the first truly Greek theater built in America, designed and constructed by Catherine Tingley in 1901. The picture associated with this entry depicts a substantial
Parthenon?
structure that bears a strong resemblance to a Greek temple. End quote. So it appears that this theater dates back to 1901, and it's the first Greek theater in America. But wait, Point Loma was that interior photo that we saw earlier in San Diego. So this is what it looked like from the outside? Try searching Point Loma ISIS Theater. The only thing that comes up in catalogs is Loma Theater in San Diego from 1945. So what's going on here? Well, there's an enlightening page from the San Diego History Center about the history of the first Greek theater in America at Point Loma, California. We might finally be getting closer to an understanding of what these ISIS theaters are, thanks to this source. However, note that this information is still not connecting the ISIS theaters from other cities, making it a localized explanation. Here's a quote from the source. Quote, the Greek Theater, which is today located on the California Western University campus, is perhaps one of the most majestic and inspiring edifices in Southern California. Although it is situated just above the surf of the Pacific, it did not spring from the ocean as its situation might provoke the imagination to believe. There is a fascinating history behind the awesome splendor of this theater which dates back to 1901. In 1897, Madam Catherine Tingley purchased a sanitarium from Dr. Lauren Wood. It was Madam Tingley's dream to found an Athens of the West at Point Loma. A dynamic woman who believed in working to make her dream a reality, Madam Tingley became the leader of the Theosophical Society in 1896, and in February 1898 changed the name to the Universal Brotherhood in Theosophical Society. After purchasing the sanitarium, she changed its name to the Academy and used it as a living quarters and as a schoolroom for the fine arts. In 1900, she completed the construction of this building by adding a stained glass dome and then built the circular Temple of Peace, situated next to the Academy. Soon after the completion of the structure, excavations were begun at the head of a natural canyon for a Greek theater. The first soil was turned on July 1st, 1901. Little digging was actually needed because of the canyon's original shape.
I've been noticing that more and more.
By November of 1901, 11 semicircular tiers of wood had been erected. The ground which the amphitheater was built was packed down and used for calisthenics and as a meeting center.
That doesn't look like calisthenics.
End quote. So that ties everything together. These theaters were initiated by Theosophists,
Athens of the West,
which confirms the ISIS symbolism, the occult connection.
Oh, why is that Nazi symbol there? Nope, it's the wrong way. There's an Athens in Georgia too that may or may not have ties to the old world, because not that far down the road we also have Rome, Georgia.
Catherine Tingley was also responsible for the School for the Revival of the Lost Mysteries of Antiquity. Her Wikipedia page reveals an interesting character. She took legal action against her critics to the point where no one dared to attack her publicly. She established several theosophical branch centers in America and Europe. So, what were these Theosophists doing with these early movie theaters? So what was the first movie theater in America? Reportedly, it was in New Orleans in 1896. Yet this fact raises more questions than answers. The theater,
saying theaters, do you mean movie theaters? Motion picture theaters?
Housed 400 seats in a projector. However, this history wasn't uncovered by the city or state historical society, but rather by independent researchers who stumbled upon a 1912 article in 1996. It took until 2020 for a historical marker to be established. The question arises, why does it fall to independent researchers to discover such crucial pieces of our historical puzzle? What does the archive department even do? Moreover, the interior of Vitascope Hall is quite large, does not appear to be the first attempt at such an endeavor. And what films were screening at this time? In 1896, American cinema was essentially non-existent. The few films that did exist were French, and the details about them, much like Alice Guy and the Cabbage Fairy, have been lost. Were they simply playing short films at Vitascope Hall? It's worth noting that these early film technologies were initially showcased at world fairs, such as the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a seminal event in the history of early film technology. At this fair, there were multiple demonstrations of nascent cinematic devices. Even Thomas Edison's kinetoscope was on display. Though it wasn't the official unveiling of the technology, this device was essentially a peep show apparatus wherein viewers could watch a short film through a viewing slot on the top of the machine. In the early 1890s, the Fantascope emerged and was presented at the Cotton States and International Exposition in Atlanta in 1895. The Fantascope projected a film that Charles Jenkins had shot in his own backyard, a film named Annabelle's Butterfly Dance, and every frame was allegedly colorized according to a 1918 book by Homer Croy. However, contradictions soon arose. A film historian, Terry Ramsey, in 1926 questioned this claim, as the dancer reportedly featured in the film had never danced for Jenkins. Ramsey couldn't find the newspaper Croy cited, not even in Jenkins' personal scrapbook. However, a successful projection in 1895 was confirmed. Now, the concept here is that this technology was in its nascent stage, and within a short period, the same type of theaters sprang up all across the United States. It's highly unlikely that these theaters were being built from scratch. They were probably existing properties that were renovated into theaters. It could even be argued that this technology was hijacked. The technology wasn't brand new. Magic lanterns, projectors that use slides, had been used since 1659 for both entertainment and education. The only significant difference with the later technology was the use of film and the kinetoscope attachment, which moved the film along to create the illusion of movement. These magic lanterns did show moving pictures to a degree, movies or entertainment, and there were catalogs and private collections. Different types of magic lanterns existed, all employing various mechanisms for creating movement. Some examples of these include a sliding magic lantern with animation from 1890, showing a young boy and girl on a seesaw. These animated slides serve as testament to the fact that they understood the concept of frame-by-frame animation quite well, long before traditional cinema took root. Some of these slides even had a mechanism for rotation. With a simple turn of a handle, you could get a fluid animation. In fact, if we go back to 1833, we encounter the phenakistoscope, often hailed as the first widespread animation device and the first form of moving media entertainment. Yes, it's true that flexible film, credited to George Eastman in 1885, supposedly took a long time to develop, and is touted as the reason movies took so long to emerge. But the film Eastman invented wasn't plastic, it was paper with a coating. Is it possible that cinema existed much earlier and was simply kept from the public eye? Magic lanterns, which share the same concept as a camera obscura, are likely ancient in origin. We know that the camera obscura dates back to the 11th century with Alhazen's Book of Optics, the oldest reference to a camera. So can we trust the narrative that it took almost 1,000 years to figure out frame-by-frame animation?
Yes.
Worth noting is that magic lanterns are mentioned in Plato's Liber Vacae, indicating that they might go even further back than the Arabic medieval scholars. The notion that emerges from all this is that film history has been heavily distorted and manipulated. The first theaters in America, or at least the ones recorded in our history, were occult theaters. Isis is an Egyptian goddess, but it also represents a Freemasonic initiation ritual, supposedly dating back to ancient times. The mysteries of Isis were religious initiation rites carried out in the cult of the Egyptian goddess Isis in the Greco-Roman world. they borrowed from other mystery rites, notably the Eleusinian mysteries, known for their ritualistic use of drugs to induce altered states of consciousness. It's crucial to remember that the mysteries of Isis were secret initiation rituals. These initiations frequently involved intense experiences, like nocturnal darkness being broken by bright light or loud music that causes disorientation in an intense religious experience. Strangely enough, this seems remarkably similar to the early cinematic experiences. Initiates were instructed not to discuss the details of their experiences, so our understanding of these ancient rites is limited due to their inherent secrecy. While these rites may originate from Egyptian or Greco-Roman mysteries, they still have relevance to Freemasons today. Freemasonry is believed to have roots in Egypt, as evidenced by the oldest known Masonic text, the Halliwell manuscript, also known as the Regis poem, dated between 1390 and 1425. This document posits that the craft of Masonry began with Euclid in Egypt and found its way to England during the reign of King Ethelstan in the 10th century. In 1877, Helena Blavatsky authored Isis Unveiled, a book that delves into the master key to the mysteries of both ancient and modern science and theology. Initially titled The Veil of Isis, the name was changed due to an existing 1861 Rosicrucian work by W. W. Reed. While Blavatsky was not a Freemason, her work inspired many other occult societies, including the Masons. The master key revealed in her book is seen as the secret to occult powers and forces unknown to science. Freemasonry, with its unique system of rituals and initiations, has notably influenced the arts, particularly music and theater. Renowned composers like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Ludwig van Beethoven, both active Freemasons, infused their compositions with Masonic principles. In the 18th century, opera served as the influential medium of artistic expression, combining music, drama, and the visual arts in a way that captivated audiences.
Masons have been the
It was inevitable that
people
Masonic
since day
themes
one.
would permeate this vibrant and immersive art form. Opera composers like Mozart, a recognized Freemason, frequently utilized the operatic stage to subtly express Masonic themes and ideologies. A prime example that links the Egyptian mysteries to Freemasonry is Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, often interpreted as an allegory for Masonic.
In Isis theater, and the way they have everything angled, and obviously those guys are Freemasons, so they can play anywhere, even now. But then again, all these angles in new theaters are trash. I don't know. Maybe it had some kind of power.
Initiation,
Or
abundant with
mind
Masonic
control.
symbols and rituals.
Eraser.
The plot centers around Tamino, who endures trials of virtue and strength to prove his worth. His journey mirrors the Masonic initiation rites wherein candidates progress through stages to attain enlightenment and brotherhood. In the opera, Isis, the Egyptian goddess of wisdom and initiation, is recurrently invoked. Tamino and Pamina, symbolizing the essential interdependence of male and female, embark on their initiation into the temple as a unified androgynous being to uncover the mysteries of the gods. Quote, "Triumph, triumph, you noble couple. You have overcome the trials. Initiates of Isis now. Come, enter into the temple." End quote.
Pied Piper.
Interestingly, early theaters were often called Orpheums, derived from Orpheus or the House of Orpheus. Orpheus was famed for his mastery of the lyre, said to enchant gods, humans, animals, and even rocks. Orpheus also lends his name to the Orphic Mysteries or Orphism, a mystery cult focused on the deified Orpheus. Much like the Egyptian rites, Orphism also had secret initiation rituals. It's intriguing to find not one, but two clear symbolic connections to secret societies in early American film and entertainment history. And let's not forget Isis and the moon. The association between the moon and illusion is undeniable, and this connection lends itself to the appropriateness of the name Isis for a theater housing a silver screen. The choice of silver as the metal associated with the moon further enhances the occult symbolism intertwined with such a cinematic setting. Isis is linked to magic, healing, and fertility, and she also embodies the mystical qualities that align with the enchantment
must
and
work out.
transformative power of cinema. Just as Isis was believed to possess the ability to create illusions and manipulate reality, movies crafted on the silver screen have the
No
potential to
fucking way.
transport audiences into extraordinary worlds, evoking a sense of wonder and suspending disbelief. Moreover, silver, traditionally connected to the moon in various mystical rites and traditions, accentuates the occult undertones of a theater named Isis. The moon's silvery light reflects the ethereal glow of the silver screen, emphasizing the celestial terrestrial mirror connection that reinforces the transcendent nature of the cinematic experience. Also, Nickelodeons are, in a way, the modern successors to the venues that hosted ancient mysteries. These small cinema theaters, often repurposed storefronts, would charge 5 cents for admission.
So how did it
While
become
not
a
the
fucking
first
kids
indoor
network?
theaters, they do bear an intriguing connection to the term Odeon, an ancient Greek or Roman term for a roofed theater. Given the massive scale of these ancient theaters, the comparison is nothing short of fascinating. Despite the reputation of America as
Nice
a
flag.
predominantly Christian nation during this period, many theaters featuring occult themes were prevalent. The Isis Theater, as we've discovered, was a theosophical occult theater, one of many emerging in the early histories of various American cities. These theaters' presence during a period strongly identified with Protestant or Catholic values raises eyebrows, especially given the proximity of these theaters to downtown churches, creating a perplexing contradiction. Oddly, there seems to be a lack of videos discussing this historical aspect. With little to no coverage on YouTube and scarce sources available online, and even those that do exist fail to present this topic in its full
Look at that.
context.
Arabic,
Why are there
Nazis,
so many ISIS
Jews.
theaters? Is there a connection to Freemasonry? Why is
Right,
so
not
little
Nazis.
information
Wrong
available,
swastika.
and from what can be found, none of it connects with other local histories? Could it be that film history has been deliberately obscured? Perhaps this technology existed long before we believe, serving both as a form of entertainment for the wealthy elite and as a secret initiation ceremony for future members. Over the decades, this clandestine art could have slipped into the realm of the occult or hidden, veiled from the public eye. Another theory is that these theaters hosted secret occult ceremonies that employed the art of cinema to induce altered states of consciousness.
Which is weird because you think about Hollywood now, they're pretty much like a cult. And they spread their fucking message through movies. And you know, a big majority of Hollywood likes to diddle on kids.
The elaborate interior design of the Point Loma Isis Theater, replete with quality, symbolic references, seems excessive for merely watching movies. Alternatively, there may have been a higher form of this art, a mystical and secret occult practice, where initiates watch these films in altered states, engaging in a kind of magic. This occult practice may have been lost to history due to its secretive nature. So we're curious, is there an ISIS theater near you? What do you think's going on with these theaters? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and all we can hope is that our minds...
I already checked. I don't have any near me. The closest is in Indiana. But anyway. So that's where I believe. It's funny how they, like I said, they had a pharmacy in the theater. But if you look at the way the theaters were built and the architecture in them, they're not square. They're definitely not square, especially on the insides. There's got to be a reason for it, and that's why we don't have it today. Or maybe we do, it's just covered up by a ceiling. Never know. Fucking communist. Anyway, now from movie theaters and ways to control you to public education, asylums, hospitals. I think I tore my shoulder this morning.
One of the tools used in the process of erasing our history is what we know as lunatic asylums. Now, if you're new to this topic, most people, when they think of lunatic asylums,
they were putting the freed slaves so they could take their kids for the orphan trains.
Think of the movies or what's now called psychiatric hospitals for people with severe mental disorders. There's definitely multiple levels to this topic, and we have the dark side, which goes into these institutions not attempting to heal these problems in any real or holistic way. And so the main approach to these health problems involves suppression through drugs, which does not fix the issue and in most cases just makes things worse. I'm sure many of you guys have seen the movies where someone's put into these mental institution and they're completely sane, but they're not able to escape for whatever reason. It could be the institution is attempting to keep you hostage for experimental reasons, and or you have been deemed to be insane simply for going against the establishment. It could also be that you're sane, but the institution and the outside world perceives you to be insane for your beliefs, such as schizophrenic patients who tend to communicate with other worlds.
Hey.
These institutions have a history, and most of these old asylums are these Tartarian, old world looking buildings that have been taken over and repurposed. You find very similar themes with the same common story, and they all use similar terminology, such as being founded or established in 1804 or 1820, but what if these were not created during the 1800s, but were actually taken over after some type of reset? Many of the dates that they give us can be easily manipulated as well. But for the most part, the oldest asylum is in Virginia, and it was founded in 1773.
Oh.
So, most of these all started popping up around the 1812 to 1850 Civil War time period, and they actually used that as an excuse for why they needed to create even more of these institutions, because people were insane after the war, and they needed these institutions as places of refuge. History attempts to paint these asylums in a positive light, but what if it's the complete opposite? In order to understand this, make sure you've seen the other videos on Tartaria explained, including the one on the Civil War, which had nothing to do with slavery and was really a movement of power from the old world to the new cabal that had taken over temporarily. It's thought that the cannons were really used for destroying old world buildings and the mass wealth that was accumulated outside of the cabal's control. Once we establish that, we can see that one of the main tools for controlling those who may resist the new reset or still have memories of the past society would be to throw them into a mental asylum and heal them for being against the establishment. In England, this probably took place before it was moved into the Americas, but there was a device specifically created for mind control and erasing memories of patients. Like I said, we really need to start in London before we move to America, as it really explains that this has been going on for a while and it's strategic. We're going to take a look at the Bethlehem Hospital, and there's some weird stuff going on here. First of all, if you search for Bethlehem Hospital, the modern picture is not even the original location. The original location was turned into the Imperial War Museum, and funnily enough, the word Bedlam actually means confusion. And notice how the cannons are right in front of the building, as if to say that these institutions created confusion and erased the old world. If we look at the history of this place, it gets even stranger. So, the Imperial War Museum isn't the first location of the building either. The hospital was founded in 1247, and it was never intended on being a hospital. It was originally designed to be an institution aimed to support the Crusader Church and link England to the Holy Land. We get a bunch of history from 1200 to the 1600s about the place being used as a medieval hospital for the needy. And as we get into the 1600s, there was a movement from the medieval style of each patient having an old style keeper physician to take care of them, to the new system, which essentially involved a bunch of wealthy aristocrats starting their own hospitals that would later be termed madhouses, as their healing methods were far too aggressive. There would be one physician residing over the entire institution with a visiting surgeon, and drugs were given to the patients in order to heal them of their illnesses. What ended up happening was a medical regime in which medical practices were being generalized across all patients, and the result was extreme violent medical practices that would induce vomiting and voiding of the bowels by force. We really only have the basic plans of this building, but in 1667, the hospital was moved to Moore Fields, which I find very interesting. Like, why is it called Moore Fields? And did they really move it, or was the structure already here? They keep moving because they are damaging these buildings beyond repair. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense to constantly keep reconstructing buildings at this level. Moore is in a lot of old architecture and city names in England, so it is very interesting.
Like, how the fuck do you move?
Let's take a look at what this place looked like. I mean, this is pretty massive. They're trying to tell us that it took them only a year to make this, which, if you ask me, that's some BS. So 100 years passed by, and by the end of the 18th century, the hospital in Moore Fields was supposedly deteriorating with uneven floors, buckling walls, and a leaking roof. So remember, they didn't really build this, so they used it for 100 years, and then after 100 years, they essentially destroyed the place, and in 1791, a report was sent to the governor listing 800 pounds of damage, which would be around 1.2 million pounds today. And sure, that's a lot of money, but it would cost way more to build an entirely new building, especially the one that we see today with the Imperial War Museum. But regardless, they say it was beyond repair, and so they moved to St. George Fields. And yes, they want us to believe they did all this on horse and buggy. Yet, today, the modern hospital is so small. You would think such an institution with a long history would try to preserve it by having somewhat of a nice modern building.
Yeah, it's like one building of it.
That's just the history for this one asylum. They all have this theme. Now, we went to this one specifically because there's some crazy stuff that went on here. There was this guy named James Tilly Matthews. He was a London tea broker who is basically the first documented case of schizophrenia. In the 1790s, concerned at the likelihood of a war between Britain and France, Matthews, who traveled to France, was a part of some type of resistance, or the Girondists, which were attempting to end the monarchy. Whether he was working as a spy for the English is questionable, but after spending time in France, he was accused of being associated with these Girondists, which the French establishment at the time used the whole reign on terror as an excuse to imprison their enemies and to continue their agenda of control. So Matthews was thrown in prison, and after 3 years, the French authorities concluded that he was a lunatic and released him. When he returned to London, Matthews wrote 2 letters to Lord Liverpool, complaining about conspiracies directed to him, and during some debate in the House of Commons, he yelled treason. Now, I don't know if that's completely true, who knows, but basically the officials arrested him and placed him in the Bethlehem Hospital in 1797.
Life.
After examination, he declared that he had taken part in secret affairs of state in reference to his efforts in France. After 10 years in the hospital, his friends and family petitioned for his release on the grounds that he wasn't insane. His family hired their own doctors, Matthews was re-examined, and he was declared sane.
What?
So this is when it gets really crazy. A year after he was released, a man named John Haslam produced the book Illustrations of Madness, in which he intended to settle the dispute over Matthews' sanity. Essentially, this book is what ends the debate on what really happened with Matthews. It shares his story and paints him as a lunatic, even though the author does attempt to stay unbiased. But here's the thing, even though there are some elements to the story that may be caused by some type of schizophrenia, it's likely that this was purposely induced as he knew way too much information. What do you think they did to him for 10 years
Almost
in the
like
hospital?
MK Ultra.
So essentially, this was made to make this information look like complete insanity, when really, there may be some truth to it. Let's remember that during this time, asylums were mainly vehicles of the state. So Matthews believed that there was this gang of criminals and spies skilled in pneumatic chemistry. This gang would torment him by means of rays emitted by a machine called the heirloom, or gaseous charge generator. They put James Matthews in Bethlehem Hospital because he knew of the secret war machine that was used by these French revolutionaries, which we can ask, who were these revolutionaries, and is there something else going on with that story? But essentially, 250 years before the CIA's failed brainwashing experiments, somehow French revolutionaries in France had created a mind control machine in death ray. Is this another setup revolution similar to the Bolshevik Revolution that was a counter operation? James somehow found himself mixed in the middle,
Told you it was a
and only due to his family,
counter.
he luckily got out and left us with the only known knowledge of these devices. Who knows, these could be even older and explain how many other cities were taken over behind the scenes. But in his very descriptive explanation of the machine, Matthews explained that these machines had been deployed all over London, secretly in cellars. The heirloom was enormous. It stood 7 meters tall, and it was surrounded by barrels that fed noxious gases through oiled leathered pipes into the main body of the machine. The gases were derived from substances including gas from the horse's anus, seminal fluid, and putrid human breath. The heirloom used magnetically charged air particles that could be directed towards its victim in order to induce the effect of mesmerism. Of course, we don't take mesmerism seriously today in modern science. However, this was not the case during this time period, and obviously there was an advanced machine capable of inducing these effects, so who's to say that these people can't do the same with their minds? But regardless, the machine needed to be operated by a certain amount of members who each had their own name and duty, as described by Matthews. The main body of the machine had a number of keys, levers, and brass retorts. These were used to modulate the flow of magnetically charged air that was emitted from the machine. Skillfully combined sequences of the various levers and keys could produce different types of air current, which could be directed towards the victim to assault them with a whole arsenal of psychological and physiological effects. Essentially, this was some type of instrument.
Basically cow farts, or horse farts and horse semen.
And an art at that, as someone would basically play it as a piano and magnetically charge the air current with the intention of directing it towards the victim to assault them. One of these effects were called kiting, where an idea is forced into the thoughts of the victim, which undulates in the intellect for hours together. And how much soever the person assailed may wish to direct his mind to other subjects, he finds himself unable to do so. Similarly, thought-making. This gang could literally suck the thoughts out of a victim out of their head and replace it with any subject they choose. They had an effect called lobster cracking, in which the external pressure of the magnetic atmosphere surrounding the person assailed was increased so as to stagnate his circulation and produce instant death. They also interestingly talk about nutmeg, which is also known to give a psychedelic reaction to those who are allergic. They must have known that it could be used as a suggestogen. There are even depictions of the number of controls this machine.
That movie, with the Scarecrow and Batman. What kind of dust did he use?
Machine had multiple parameters for a variety of different settings. Now think about it. If this was just a delusion, then how is it possible to have such a detailed description of this device? There's a reason that this machine is not commonly known, and it's because these devices have been used on populations throughout history in order to cause amnesia, control popular narratives, and to take over societies. If they use this politically, who's to say they don't use this in other areas? What if this explains the Industrial Revolution and having all this cheap labor where you had these people working in bad conditions and yet they still stayed? The story is that they were poor and they had to. But what if there was some type of device in the cellars of these old mills that induced specific thoughts like being a hard worker because you have to? Now,
maybe that's why we don't have.
There is another part of this that we'll cover briefly. Basically, when you look up influencing machine, what you have is all these educated mainstream scholars concluding that the heirloom and other mind control devices are just visions of schizophrenics. But not just that there's even something more profound to get from all this, that the influencing machine is some deep subconscious archetypal trope. Now, I'm not saying that this can't happen to someone with schizophrenia, but I am very suspicious of this public opinion and that these are all simply hallucinations of madmen. First off, isn't it convenient that the first schizophrenia patient ever just so happens to have the most detailed engravings of this machine, and no one at this time had been discussing any technologies like this in public literature, so there was no way he just imagined this out of nowhere. They literally built a working replica of the machine. It wasn't just a delusion, this was influenced by some type of event, and this wasn't just with James Matthews. There have been several counts of artists depicting these types of devices, but they're just labeled as insane. Or they just try to decode this as some deep Jungian philosophical symbolism when, really, there may be multiple things going on. spiritual forces that influence these peoples, and or physical devices that actually do exist and influence the thoughts of their victims. There are actually quite a few depictions of these, and of course, it's not to say that every one of these is real, but this idea of a mind control device is obviously prevalent in our psyches, and sure, you can take the psychiatrist approach and just say it's an aspect of our deep subconscious or whatever, and I'm sure that does play a part, but it's not the meat of the subject. All the scholarly work on the subject tends to take this viewpoint. However, as many of you are thinking, these types of devices have existed for who knows how long, but they're not just fantasy, and they've been around far longer than just the heirloom. You would most likely think there would be an attempt to develop a mesmerism device and or mind control device in the 18th century because hypnotism was believed to exist. That being the case, you would think that powerful people would look into creating a mind control device with the advancement of technology and electricity during the 18th century.
Called cell phones.
Even in ancient societies, psychedelics and suggestogens have been used as means of controlling one's mind. What resulted in the 18th century was a fairly simple machine to construct that was advanced to operate and would go to work behind the scenes, influencing public suggestion and controlling the minds of anyone who would resist the establishment. This device would also allow for creating amnesia in a new population. Interestingly enough, there's a game called Amnesia. I'm sure most of you guys know about Dark Descent, but there's another one called A Machine for Pigs. There's this artist who composited everything as one map, and it's really interesting to look at because you have the same type of heirloom device, and you see this happening on a mass scale with it coming out of the factories, and there's a Tesla coil in the background as well, magnetizing the currents. There's actually a lot of weird stuff with this game. You have the old world Tartarian buildings, and there's also this thing about absinthe, which again, that gets into psychedelics. But yeah, I just thought it was really weird. I mean, a lot of these illustrations seem to be depicting some kind of
back to Europe, I would
hidden past, or maybe they know something that we don't. Also, I want to give a shout out to Paul Cook, as he had some really good research on this topic, so make sure to check out his channel. If we return to America with that in mind, and I mean, that's just the surface of what's gone on throughout history at these hospitals. It gets much darker, but for the most part, we can begin.
Maybe it's just because it's a far off view from it. I don't see any street lamps on the pass, but I also don't see a lot of electricity. But I do see these. Yeah.
Begin to question the narrative behind these structures, as it's the same theme with most of them. The narrative just doesn't really add up. Most of these asylums are really big, and their architecture is quite advanced for its time considering the tools they had. Also, the population was too little at the time to construct these structures, and many of them were built in just a few years. Let's keep in mind that the first general hospital in America is the Pennsylvania Hospital, which was founded in 1751. So let me get this straight. They're building these massive structures in cities out of nowhere. Philadelphia started in the early 1700s, and they don't even think about creating a general hospital for over 50 years. The oldest asylum is the Virginia Eastern Lunatic Asylum, which no longer exists as it was destroyed in a very convenient fire in 1885. According to the depictions, it looks to be an old world building that is slightly buried beneath the ground. This building only took 2 years to build according to the story, as it was established in 1771 and the first patient was administered.
When you see a lot of these older buildings, if you want to tell they're older and maybe they were from the last reset, always look. Can you see the mouse? Yeah. Always look at the bottom floor. If they got a half buried window, and that's not like the ones in Germany where there's a basement, then that's more than likely a survivor of a mud flood.
In 1773. The second oldest asylum is the Spring Grove Asylum in Maryland. Again, it looks very similar. Now, it started off as a general hospital in 1797, but it actually can trace its roots to an institution 3 years earlier. Basically, it was a men's club headed by a sea captain named Jeremiah Yellett, established what they called a retreat for the ailing mariners of Baltimore. That kind of sounds weird to me, but that's how it began, as some private men's club, and then became a hospital for strangers and mariners. The Hospital for Seamen and Strangers.
Gross.
It seems that the hospital was actually funded by Captain Yellett and his associates. So The story is that the club evolved into a hospital as a way to take care of the mariners who had many medical conditions such as nutritional diseases. They referred to many of the patients as inmates, and it seems that there is something else going on with this supposed retreat. Basically, it could have been a means for mind controlling newcomers who came by
Everyone goes
sea
in,
and labeling them
everyone
as
comes out.
insane if they do not fit the narrative. At the time, Maryland's mentally ill were called inebriates and or being mentally retarded. Now, they didn't have a word for
Is that
being
where
mentally
inebriated
insane.
came from? So people that are drunk are fucking retards?
Maybe because it wasn't really prevalent until after the reset, so of course they had to create this narrative. The Northeast Coast is home to
Never mind, it
America's
says it right
oldest ports, at least from the mainstream sense, and where these old world cities first started to be taken over, right? Like the west of America wasn't conquered until like after the Civil War, so the Northeast must have started these reset plans very early on, programming any immigrants who may be trying to relocate. So in 1797, the hospital had a new purpose for the reception and care of lunatics, or really anyone who didn't fit the narrative.
Oh, fuck.
Let's also keep in mind that yellow fever epidemic happened around this time, and I just wonder.
You know, I used to tell people about yellow fever, and I was like, I don't think I can have yellow fever. And like, why not? Well, because I'm already, from Asia. Get it? No? Fuck you guys. You guys need a sense of humor today.
If this was also done with intent. Now that we understand they had a mind control device using magnetized air currents,
Fuck you, Army.
you would think that maybe they know how to spread disease using similar methods. Of course, the excuse is mosquitoes were breeding in the wetlands, and because of warmer climate, this led to a number of these outbreaks. That doesn't really make sense, as the Native Americans never suffered from these issues, so there's definitely something else going on when it comes to all this sickness, the sudden need to create all these hospitals out of nowhere, which really should have been constructed from day one in any well-planned city. Unless, of course, they didn't have any need for hospitals, but that's another can of worms. Basically, in 1808, the state took over the building and they decided to do $40,000 in repairs, which that's a lot of money at that time. And the story goes that they got this money because a bunch of lottery winners donated back to the state so that they could expand the hospital.
Oh.
Right? That makes sense. Okay, this is when it gets crazy. So in 1813, during the War of 1812, an admission to the city hospital could be ordered or authorized by the chancellor of an entity known as the Chancery Court. As the head of this court, the chancellor had the authority to commit to the facility those individuals who were referred to by the law as any lunatic, idiot, or person insane.
Holy
Acts of
shit.
1813. So within 10 years of creating this hospital, which was started and funded by a boys club, the state takes over and creates a law that they can basically put anyone they deem crazy in the mental asylum. Captain Yellett obviously had connections with the state. They were in cahoots. He just funded it. Now, I'm just giving you one example, the second oldest in fact, but you just have to think, these started appearing out of nowhere all around this area around this time, and I mean a lot of asylums. And the typical answer is because of yellow fever, civil war, and syphilis. But as we have gone over the hidden side of things, we see there may be a different agenda at play. All these backstories for these hospitals aren't giving you the whole truth. I mean, just look at this logbook of the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. This list documents reasons for admission to the institution. I mean, these guys weren't playing around.
Vicious vices.
So these are pretty crazy.
Whoa.
If you ran out of money and
Let's go over some of these. So, we have business trouble. That's kind of a weird reason to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Committed. Kicked in the head by a horse. I could see that. Ill treatment by husband. Wow. So if your husband beats you, you're committed to an asylum? Imaginary female trouble. Manti Teo. Ooh, you're fucked. Oh, shit. Give me a second, guys.
became homeless, got business trouble. If you got kicked in the head by a horse, I guess that was common back then. Imaginary female trouble, an immoral life, not sure what that's supposed to mean. Imprisonment, okay, that's kind of scary. If you had your own religious beliefs, or if you were a woman with her own beliefs, that would get you sent to an asylum. Let's see. Bad whiskey. Okay. These institutions don't really care about your health. They were designed for that purpose. These facilities are tools of the state to control a society based on what the controllers deem appropriate. If you overstudied religion, that would get you sent to the institution. Overtaxing mental powers, so if you were too smart, they would get you. Oh, and look, you can get sent in for politics, right? How convenient. I mean, this is a super long list. I'm not going to go over it all, read it over, but it's just insane. I
My
mean,
bad, guys.
egotism,
Okay.
how do we even measure that? Someone acts arrogant, they just get thrown into a lunatic asylum? I mean, this kind of became a
Smallpox,
meme
guys.
because of some of the.
Oh, let's read some more of these. These are really important, guys. Oh, immoral life. I thought that said immortal life. Imprisonment. Well, imprisonment would be in an asylum, whatever. You could get committed for jealousy, right? Laziness. Masturbation. Oh, fuck. Masturbation for 30 years. What the hell does that mean? Medicine to prevent contraception. Oh, you want birth control? You're fucked. You guys think we have it bad now? Come on, look at this shit. Yeah, I don't get the novel reading. Mental excitement. So getting happy. Opium habits. Okay, I could see that. Overaction to the mind. I don't know what that means. Overstudying of religion. Gen A. Overtaxing mental powers. What? So if you can't handle stress? Parenting where... Oh my god, do y'all see that? Parents were cousins. Parents were cousins. Oh, fuck me. Tobacco and masturbation. I didn't realize those two go together. It's kind of a weird combination. Political excite. Fuck, I'm done. Politics. Religious enthusiasm. What? If you have a fever or loss of a lawsuit, listen, if you get sued and you lose, I'm going to have you committed. All right. Asthma. Wow. Ooh. Fits and desertion of husband. Guess you can't divorce your husband or leave him because you're going to get committed. Bad whiskey. I would have somebody murdered for bad whiskey. For real. Fucking asylum. Bloody flux. Okay. Brain fever. I could see that actual. Business nerves. I don't really know where that's coming from. Congestion of the brain. I could see that. Death of his sons in war. Wow. Congestion of the brain. I think I already said that. Decoyed into the army. I'm not sure I understand that one. Desertion by husband. Eee. So your husband can't leave you either. Domestic affliction. Domestic trouble. Tropism. I'm not sure what the hell it is. Egotism. Ooh, that's a lot of people in that community. Epileptic fits. I could see that. Excessive sexual abuse. Why would they put them in an asylum and not in a prison? Exposure and hereditary. Ow. Exposure and quackery. Exposure in army. Well, fuck, I'm screwed. Fever and jealousy. You can get committed for jealousy, guys. Fighting fire. So all you firemen out there, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have you committed. Right. Suppression. Wait. Suppressed masturbation. So you can get committed for masturbation or you can get committed for suppressing masturbation. Makes sense. Menzies. Meningitis. The war. Fuck. Time of life. Listen, guys, if you've ever had the time of your life, I'm going to have you committed. I'm just telling you. Venereal excess. Okay. Uterine detachment. Ouch. That sounds painful. Women trouble. Well, fuck. I got 99 problems and a bitch ain't one, so I think I'm good for that one. Superstition, god damn it. Shooting of daughter. Oh, you get committed for shooting your daughter, not put in jail. Smallpox. Snuff eating for 2 years. Why would you eat snuff? Spinal irritation. Bro, if your back hurts, you're getting committed. Gathering in the head. I'm screwed because there's like a bunch of voices in there. Greediness. Ooh. Grief. No, I don't want you to feel grief. If you feel grief, you're getting committed. If you get a gunshot wound, you're being committed. Even if it's not your fault. Oh, if you study too much, careful, guys. Rumor or husband's murder. Oh. Salvation Army. Oh, I guess that's not a good thing anymore. Or now it is. Seduction and disappointment. Ooh. So if you talking to a chick, right, and you tell her you're going to fuck her all night long, but then you get into the bed and you last 15 seconds, she could have you committed. Self-abuse. Actually, I could see that. Sexual abuse and stimulants, so drug use. Sexual derangement. Ow. False confinement. Okay. Being an idiot. Fell from a horse in war. And nerves. Bro, this is some fucked up shit back then.
The weirder, funnier ones, but they would basically throw you into an asylum for any reason that they wanted. It could be any reason. They would just throw you in if you were a problem. I mean, just
look at that. If you look at the years on it, 1864 to 1889.
It could be any reason. They would just throw you in if you were a problem.
Or right before
just take a look at some of these asylums. Very old world looking, and it's not really commonly accepted that there are castles in America, but many of these old asylums and old prisons are literally just that. They just aren't called castles, and we've never looked at them with new eyes. Many of these old asylums share what is called the Kirkbride Plan, which is a system of mental asylum designs advocated by American psychiatrist Thomas Kirkbride. Now, this is the explanation they give on why many of these buildings have similar designs, but could it be that these are actually older world structures, many of them containing underground tunnels and also mud-flooded windows? It's even in the narrative. One good example is Rockwood Asylum, which first we have to look at the Kingston Penitentiary, which if we look at some photos, it looks very old world.
Canada, by the way.
This is Canada, but still, you can find the same thing in the US. But the story goes that the Kingston Penitentiary was overrun with medically ill, criminally insane inmates, so to solve this problem, the asylum was built on the shores of Lake Ontario, close to the penitentiary, built by the prisoners themselves. That doesn't make any sense to me, but we're supposed to believe that somehow they made these insane inmates build an asylum for themselves
to house them.
By the way, in the Rockwood Asylum, they would literally make people wear uniforms with the label lunatic, and it was also a common practice to drill directly into the skull. So, I'm sure they were so excited to build this asylum. Who would have guessed that the mentally insane have the skill to actually build architecture like this? I highly recommend checking out There's No Place Like Home. She has a great video on this subject, so shout out to her. But she goes over this as well, and we see the same thing with the Toronto Insane Asylum. That basically, during this whole 1800s period, the state took it onto themselves to take care for whoever they deemed to be critically insane. As I just showed you with the list, you can imagine how this could go really wrong. The Toronto building has the same dome structure with the stairs that lead up to the entrance, mud-flooded windows, and looks like a typical Tartarian building. Another good example is Traverse City State Hospital, which is extremely Victorian looking. It also has a pretty scary feel to it. But they want us to believe that this was built in 1880 in Traverse City, Michigan, when the population at that time was less than 2,000.
How many beds?
Why would they need a hospital that big? Because these buildings were used as a means for the state to control the population, and they used old world buildings to create these institutions, as they didn't have the budget or tools to create such detailed structures. I didn't know about this one until recently, but the oldest hospital still in operation in California is the Napa State Hospital in California. Founded in 1872, it has very strange vibes, and the entire thing is ginormous. It was originally self-sufficient with its own dairy
kinda
and
wanna
poultry
visit that.
ranches, vegetable gardens,
California.
orchards, and other farming operations. It basically was its own city, and this is in North California. Also, many of these
Fucking Northern
facilities
California.
have very high security.
Besides wine.
Anyone and everyone who enters goes through multiple doors, metal detectors, and locked gates. The weird thing is that it doesn't really look anything like it did in the past today. It's still out there in the valley and separated into different units, so I guess they are still using parts of the building, but it looks vastly different than it used to.
No
In
steep.
mind, the San Francisco World Fairs and all of these buildings that they destroyed that had the same exact architecture, and they didn't really have a reason for destroying it. It's also suspicious how they even built it in the first place. Another one is the Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital,
understand, it took 'em
or what
years
was
to
originally called
build, but
the State Asylum for the
tore it down with
Insane at Morristown. This basically is an entire city. It was the largest continuous foundation in the United States from the time it was built until it was surpassed by the Pentagon, and it's around 700,000 square feet.
Shit.
Now, let's take a look at some of the penitentiaries. The Eastern State Penitentiary looks just like a castle to me. It
Pennsylvania.
literally has gargoyles. But again, we don't normally think of castles in America, but it's just because we have been given buildings with made-up histories, and our eyes have become accustomed to just seeing the structures as government buildings or prisons and even colleges. They all have the same story of being built randomly in the early 1800s.
The high
I mean,
archways.
why would you want to make a jail look so fancy? Is this really the most efficient way to build such a structure with the tools and resources available at the time? I mean,
a jail looks
we
like
won't even build something like this
working,
today.
like, oh my god.
The Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville, Kentucky is nicknamed the Castle on the Cumberland. And another reason that these buildings are castles is that most likely they have been altered and their tops destroyed, so we aren't even seeing the entire building. If we saw it in its entirety, we would see clearly that it was not designed to be a prison. Also,
It looks more like
the
a
population of Eddyville, Kentucky in 1880 was less than 500 people, so that doesn't make any sense whatsoever to build such a massive prison. I mean, just imagine if this had steeples on it. This is very out of place for its location and time period. The Anamosa State Penitentiary is also a very unique Victorian architecture in Iowa. If we look at the population at the time, it was less than 3,000 in 1900, so again, doesn't really add up. The Tennessee State Prison is really insane.
The tornado
It actually reminds me a
destroyed that
lot of the
couple years ago.
Biltmore,
It's
which
half of the prisons
this probably
there.
connects more so with many of the old world mansions, but we actually have a little surprise coming out soon. It's going to be big.
Yeah, the whole
but
right side of the building.
back to what I was saying, the Tennessee State Prison was founded in 1832, but as in all these stories, for some reason, they always decide to move the building to a new location. It was either burned down or beyond repair, and or they come up with some new plans for some Gothic architecture. It supposedly finishes construction in 1898, but it just seems like these were redesignated structures. It's too
literally
out of
like next to the
place and
interstate,
seems
which
kind of
is
pointless
weird.
to spend so much money on these buildings to only last less than 100 years. There are many more of these prisons, but I also think colleges play the same part. I mean, think about what we're talking about. It's all state programming. The asylums, prisons, they were considered to be the same thing before psychiatric hospitals came in, and the schools took a similar approach with compulsory learning and the whole initiative to create a society of workers, not
Hey, that's
thinkers.
1903, and look.
So these
it's built
old world
in-
buildings were turned into college institutions as well. Harvard, William and Mary, Columbia University, Yale University, Princeton,
King's College.
St. John's College, Moravian University,
Nice.
Dartmouth College, St. Joseph's University. These buildings and castles have been right in front of our eyes this entire time. These are government-controlled, old-world buildings that were repurposed as mind control weapons. Each one of these colleges has its own strange narrative that really doesn't add up, but we'll have to save that for another video. Hope you all stay curious, and all we can hope is that our minds will be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I...
All right, so I have two more videos. I'm only going to show one of them right now, unless somebody wants to watch the other one, but I will tell you what they're about. Give me 2 seconds. Let me pull it up. Because this one applies to the Hollywoods. hospitals, and the Bible. So we have the Tartarian hijack and sickness, or the Bible.
Motivations or investigations to be consider magic
Bible.
as evil.
Got it.
You have Christians, mostly King James, and I understand there
Now
may
we're heading back towards Tartaria.
be Christians who understand white magic, but you have these Christians that view
This is
magic
why
as
whenever
evil
Jeff
or
talks
demonic.
about Jesus.
Then you have this new category of people that is more broad. It's not a group, but
Way,
a variety of
way,
different
way
people who are aware of the cabal and global elite. And they look at them and see that they practice similar philosophies, so the conclusion is that, oh, well, magic must be evil and wrong because the cabal have these same practices. These are the main people who have this perspective that magic is something evil instead of some natural process.
Both.
The rest of the audience is likely composed of people who have either had a magical experience, someone who's just learning about spirituality and the occult, or someone who doesn't really know about magic. And you might have the atheist that denies that magic even exists.
I'm just a demigod.
But this video is more focused towards the first two groups. So what's magic?
I was talking to my kids.
Magic is the
about
science and art of...
My parents had a Bible. I think they bought it in Europe. It was in English. That motherfucker, think about the size of a laptop, but make it 4 inches thick. And that's the Bible they had. And that looked like the front fucking page because you can put their name, both of their names were in it.
Causing change to occur in conformity with the will. Technically, any goal that you set and then do is a manifestation of your will, hence magic.
Since his dad was a Mason. And I'm the one that said, fuck it. I want to expose these bitches.
The wider picture is that magic is a phenomenon more directed to manifestation done through mind alone. Meaning causing change in the physical world through thought. Now this isn't normal everyday habitual thought, but as was said, a science and art of thinking. Another aspect to magic is states of consciousness. The atheist doesn't believe in magic because he's stuck in a very physical state of consciousness. We all experience different states of consciousness on a day-to-day basis, such as dreams and sleeping. But there are different practices that have been developed for over thousands of years.
That's pretty much one of the only Bibles I would really want. Not because of what's in it, but because of the way it looks and how old it is.
Was developed in which through ritual, changes in the real world could be manifested through mind power or will alone. It's important to note that magic only works in a God-based universe.
See?
The idea is that there's only two cosmologies. That of something, spirit, and that of nothing, materialism. The modern day cosmology is that of materialism, which is the belief.
Back in these days, maybe this is why I was boring at the wrong time. Or I'm just reliving my bloodline. Everything back then, it seems like it had a place. And then when you started getting religion, organized religion, anything, once the Bible happened, it's all made up and not made up, but they're not telling you the truth. Like Jesus was a conglomerate of every nation out, not nation, how do I say this? Pretty much every religion, whatever you want to call it, they had this guy that did the same thing with different names. And what they did, they brought them all together and they created the modern Jesus. But this was back during the Torah and the Quran.
In cage of the modern day atheist. In order to practice magic, we have to understand the concept of a hierarchy of spiritual planes, with the top plane being the Godhead or Source. Check out the Astral Plane Explained series if you want more info on these other planes.
Yeah, I'm not doing that one yet. I'm doing that next week.
Now again, there's this idea that because the King James Bible is against magic, or the simple fact that the Cabal themselves use this knowledge, that magic is totally evil and should not be practiced. There's a lot of moving parts to consider, so let's get started. The first point to make is that Christianity is based and was birthed out of what we now call the pagan tradition.
Thank you.
Check out the Christian Origin series for more information on this history. Magic is not new, and is the most ancient art form that we have, the science and art of manifesting through will. The first major point to make is to inform on the history of the ancient mystery schools. Magic has an honorable past, and it is the foundation of all religions. It was the philosophy of nobility, and the most advanced thinkers of our ancient past practiced this ancient science and art. It's difficult to summarize, but let's do a quick overview of how the tradition of magic came to be. Now remember, we are in the cosmology of something, or spiritual planes, so this isn't the history that we're taught in school, such as floating rocks in space and evolution. In the cosmology of spiritual planes, we have slowly de-evolved from our original God state into the current physical state we are currently experiencing. The reflection and the creation of base attributes of being, the zodiac, the planetary sephiroths that are the archetypal forces of our universe, slowly started to mix and flow. You could say their energies trickled down to the lower planes and created the vast variety of different thoughts and ideas. These thoughts then formed into concrete identities. As these identities begin to take life of their own, you begin to see the creation of concrete forms.
I wish I could read.
Fluidity begins to halt as spiritual forces stop shapeshifting in an everlasting cyclic process and begin to create concrete forms with boundaries. This is the moment where you can start separating subject from object. This is the creation of the astral realm. For many aeons, we were beings on this astral realm, and you could say we were very primitive and pagan in our magical ways. There was evil, and there was good. But a philosophical system of spirituality had not been developed yet. This was still a very chaotic period in our magical history. Then came the creation of the material universe. Now this is a controversial subject, as the Gnostics do say that we were trapped in the material realm and all this other stuff, but to quickly comment on that, I think Gnosticism and nihilism got mixed up along the way and created this very negative spiritual outlook on magic. These archons or beings are actually within us. They cannot trap us. They are our chakras. They are the planetary archetypal forces that first began inside of you. They are simply different attributes of yourself, or of your God self. I suspect that Gnosticism came after the Church of Iessa, so that's the next big point to make. Many of us are aware of Atlantis. Atlantis was a civilization that was semi-physical, semi-astral. You might as well say that they were on the astral plane because they were a nation of magicians with magical technology. After the destruction of Atlantis came the Church of Iessa, where we begin to see the beginning of pagan philosophies from Atlantis be turned into the first world religion. Now Atlantis wasn't necessarily pagan, but their system of astrotheology and magic did not yet have philosophical virtues. That's what brought down Atlantis. It's that there were many evil magicians who had taken advantage of the Golden Age. Not everybody who used magic was evil, but the power became unbalanced, and so the next cycle began. Quick note, it seems every time there's a fluctuation of spiritual consciousness or awareness, it's as if this is followed by some event to restart the system, as if this causes some type of collective overload. Now, after Atlantis, the world needed to be rebuilt, and the first notable civilization to do this is the Church of Iessa. Not too much is known about this church because it's been renamed and suppressed by presumably the Jesuit Catholics. This was done during the Roman Wars when they were trying to remove the Druids as a threat. From Connor McDarry,
there they are.
Quote, "It was the idea held by the leaders of the Roman Church and state, they were practically one, that all power should be centralized in the head of the church, who was also emperor of the state, and any and all religious institutions which in any way conflicted with this ideal were to be done away with.
And that's the downfall.
For this reason, the mystery cults were suppressed and initiation into the ancient or esoteric mysteries were forbidden, so that no religious establishment, worship, or practice would exist which would draw and hold men to it other than the Roman state church. And besides, as the study and preparation necessary for those who were selected for initiation into the higher mysteries was such as to develop a highly philosophic and spiritual state of mind. Such study and preparation did not comport with the object which the church rulers had in view. Such minds would not yield adherence to a mere political and idolatrous church whose doctrines were, in the main, intended for the uninstructed multitude. Such minds could not be dominated by a political or mercenary priesthood. They were enlightened men and they stood in the way of the church project. Therefore, the institutions which produced such men were to be suppressed. Quote, "The Great Pyramid,
of
which it is premier, together with the temples of the
like I said, Knights Templars, Freemasons, what the fuck are they now? The Cabal, the Illuminati. I think they just rebrand to change with the times.
Nile Valley are the most convincing witnesses and testimonials, offering no chance for contradiction or uncertainty.
A lot of the not old people. They say that the reason there's no caps on the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, is because they were actually made of gold. And they were used as... What's the fucking word I'm looking for? Fuck. like lightning rods, almost, to send signals back and forth.
To the accomplishments and genius of the Irish,
The
or
Anunnaki
as it is
were
called
really
in
big on
history,
gold.
the Aryan race. Quote, in their great missionary pilgrimage, they circled the globe in order to give religion and knowledge of God to the different races of mankind. They also established priesthoods and gave alphabets to the races who were unenlightened in such matters up to this time. Let's just stop there for a second. We're about to connect that with Tartaria and the Church of Iessa and how they traveled across the world and established this first global civilization after the flood. Let's continue. Quote, Ireland is the country in which the arts and sciences were first discovered and developed. To this country, the Greeks applied the term Ogia, a term which was never given but to the very ancient, and it is from the Irish Aryans that the Greek traced their descent, from Donnelly's Atlantis, page 458. Quote, it is to the Irish Magi we owe the discovery of fire and the common grains, which they developed from the grasses. They were the first people to practice agriculture. They invented the common tools of workmanship, which have come down to us practically unchanged from those ancient times. There were other civilizations that were creating contributions after the flood. It wasn't just the Church of Iessa. However, they're the first ones to notice because they're responsible for re-educating the entire world after the flood in what we now call the Bible. This may be shocking to some, but hang in there as I try to unveil this information. So what or who was the Church of Iessa? It's what we call the ancient Celts, Druids, or the ancient Aryans of the past. It gets confusing because this group has been mixed with many different cultures, such as the early Phoenicians, the Greeks, the early Romans, and the early Hebrews. They erased them by dividing them up into different cultures.
Oh, okay. I think this is Nashville. The bottom left. It is. So where is this building today? This building in the background? It's actually up a hill. That's the Capitol building. I think they might have moved it now that I see this picture. And if the Bicentennial Park, like I said, they have a whole timeline of Nashville's history, but nowhere near it does it have the World's Fair, which is where the Parthenon came from, which is a real life-size replica of the one in Greece.
Cultures and names, but they could only change it so much. There's still evidence of this Celtic connection etymologically. Now, historians will tell you that this group came from the east, from Mongolia, but this is to cover the history of Atlantis.
Mongolia to Tartaria.
There was a migration from west to east after the flood. One of the clues are the many maps that show the vast amount of architecture and cities all over the area that we now call Tartaria. In Tartaria Explained Part 1, we talked about how Tartar is Gaelic and it means thief, but it also means confusion. Maybe they were given that name on purpose? And this is the best part. In this old Gaelic etymological book, it says the word Tartar is often accounted for by the story of an Irish soldier who in some eastern battle called out that he had caught a Tartar. Eastern battle? Could this be the massive architectures and civilizations that we see in the east in these old maps? After Atlantis, a group of survivors landed in Ireland. At this time, the Black Fomorians were inhabiting Ireland. I have more info on this in the Secret Black History videos. There was a big war, and this is repeated in the legends of the Tuatha Dé Danann and others. But over time, this civilization, the ones that we hear in fairy tales and whatnot, is actually not that long ago. Maybe 500 to 600 years ago? It's hard to tackle that all at once, but I can explain that as we go along. Now this group, as soon as they succeeded, colonized Ireland, Britain, and Spain, and began to move to the east. In the past, these lands were all owned by the ancient Druids, and at one point, these land masses used to actually be merged together. But that's another story. The Druids went all the way to Russia and China and created a global empire. This culture at this point was no longer Irish or Celtic. This is now a global civilization, and we're at the 400, 300 year ago point now. Many different sects and cultures were developed from this church, creating the variety that we see today. When we present Tartaria, because I get people commenting all the time saying Tartarians were a very specific culture, well, we're not necessarily talking about that. We're talking about the white giant remains that can be found all around the world, similar myths and cultures that talk about red-haired giants that came and brought advanced civilization with them. Even the native Indians in America have legends about giants who possess electrical technology 300 to 500 years ago.
Part of the more
So then why say Tartaria? It's really about semantics. We're talking about the last global civilization, the ones responsible for all the similarity in architectures around the world, the ones who passed spirituality and religion after the fall of Atlantis into the New World, And they had cities and architectures in South, North America, Cambodia, China, Turkey, Iran, and it goes on and on. That's why you see the blue eyes in many of these cultures around the world, including similar dances and cultural references. They're just slightly varied based on the location. And don't get me wrong, some cultures are drastically different, but how can you explain the coincidence of similar archetypal and religious themes from around the world? There was one system. This is what we refer to as Tartaria, an advanced global civilization. One system. This
We had a car manufacturer that had the swastika. That's even the Indians, man. Obviously Poland, because there's Nazis there. This shit goes all throughout time. It's great. Fuck you, Japanese.
is what we refer to as Tartaria,
Yes,
an
I
advanced
talked
global
about that
civilization
earlier.
that was erased from
Do a video
history
on
in the
that
past
eventually.
500 years, basically. It has nothing to do with the Tartars specifically. I've mentioned this in other videos. Now let's get into what were the mystery schools. There are two factors. You have the mystery schools after the Church of Ayesa was destroyed and taken over by the Jesuit Church, and they created these mystery schools sort of as a refuge for occultists in developing these abilities in secret. Okay, then you have the mystery schools that were during the Church of Ayesa. Now remember, the Church of Ayesa is not modern day Christianity, but it is its foundation. They didn't see magic as evil, but as a tool for spiritual enlightenment. I'm sure they had regulations for people who had any intention to use magic for evil. Which brings me to my next point, which is the concept of witches, Satan, and magic specifically being associated with evil came from the Jesuit Church themselves, or the Cabal. They purposefully created this view on magic in order to confuse us from our own power that lies within. And I'm sure there's many of you right now that are still denying the existence of an earlier Bible
know you know
or
about
the
it.
Church of Ayesa, but let's take a
Good
look
to
at some
hear
of the
somebody else know
forgeries
about
created
it.
by the church and the inconsistencies that are pushed in the modern day. Now, this is pretty lengthy, a lot to cover just for one single video or even a single book. Quote, "As I have shown by citations that forgeries were committed, I shall prove by explanations that our Bible is an Irish book of pre-Roman times and an out-and-out theft without acknowledgement from the Irish Church of Ayesa. Any competent person who knows the Irish language cannot fail to recognize it." Quote, "Our present version of the Bible then is an authorized adaptation from the original Irish scriptures with alterations and additions made from time to time by Roman and British churchmen in secrecy as they deemed it necessary and advisable to do so." Quote, "The following agreement in the writings under the names of Matthew, Mark, and Luke regarding the impression made upon the people by the teachings of Jesus is an example which shows plainly the work of forging priests. It would be impossible for such agreement to have occurred in the original writings of any three men writing individually and independently on any subject whatsoever. But in fabrication from the older works and collaborating, the pre-scribes simply blundered and made each of the three witnesses write down and repeat the same identical expression in copy as to how Jesus impressed the people. Here is the forged testimony. Matthew says, "They were astonished at his doctrine." Mark says, "They were astonished at his doctrine." Luke says, "They were astonished at his doctrine." Quote, "Many authors and critics have commented upon and pointed out the inaccuracies and inconsistencies of the scriptures, and many of them have stated their firm belief that they were copied from older books. But none of them could obtain a clue beyond a surmise which was far from the truth, and none of them was able to produce the real facts which was necessary to convince." Quote, "They found so many flaws in it, which the jugglers did not cover up, that it kept the question open until the solution was found. The true source has escaped discovery until now. At least it has never been disclosed to the knowledge of mankind as a whole. The Irish scriptures were altered and adapted to the scheme of the church in order to make the fable of Ayesa a historical and geographical fact. Names from the scriptures were given to the places in Syria during its occupation by the Crusaders to bear this out. It also suited the purpose of British statecraft to obscure and suppress all evidence of the greatness and culture of the Irish nation, than whom no people in the world's history have reached greater heights both spiritually and intellectually, nor have suffered greater injustice at the hands of priestly impostors or political oppressors." Quote, "The men who were engaged in executing this literary fraud committed as well as the audacious crime
Son of a bitch, I was on mute. Fuck.
Of completely effacing all executing this literary political oppressors. Quote, the men who were engaged in executing this literary fraud committed as well as the audacious crime of completely effacing all evidence of credit due to the Irish nation for the most brilliant and glorious service to civilization and human enlightenment. It almost passes belief that a fraud so stupendous could escape so
That's
long.
where I was going. So what if parts of history are really true and just, God damn it, misinterpreted or rewritten? Maybe Hitler was bad. I'm pretty sure he was. I'm 100% sure he was. But what if how do I say this? His obsession with science and the old world and the occult. What if he was in Egypt trying to find the Ark of the Covenant? But what if it's really in Afghanistan? Because there's caves in Afghanistan, ton of caves where it could be buried. And some of them, believe it or not, if you believe the theories, are protected by giants, which is why we lost a lot of the war in Afghanistan.
Without discovery. But when we consider the thoroughness and extent to which the plot was carried out, and the magnitude of the forces which were employed in the work, it's not so much to be wondered at. Forces such as the Roman Empire, with its world power, then the Roman Catholic Church, and the British Kingdom, with propaganda systemically spread abroad in order to create a false impression of everything pertaining to the past history of Ireland and her people. These are the forces which have perpetrated and profited by this great fraud. The deception is still continued, and the secret jealously guarded by both the Roman Church and Britain from the world at large, but more particularly from the Irish people who have suffered so much from those two adverse forces. The men who executed this plot were acting jointly in the interest of both Rome and Britain. Even to this day, the British government does not encourage, even if it will allow, excavations or investigations to be made about the Hill of Tara in Ireland.
I wonder why.
Let's just stop there for a second. There's a lot to read, but he gives a couple more examples of the usage of Irish symbols being used in the Bible. I'll try to add a couple more. Quote, I'll give 2 citations here, with more to follow, to show that the names of many of the characters in the Bible are plainly Irish, and it is because of this fact that the Irish Roman Catholic priest would not allow the Irish Catholics to read the Bible. They were told not to read it, that it was not a sufficient rule of faith. The real reason was that some of the Irish people might recognize the Irish names in a Jewish Bible and ask questions that it would embarrass them to answer satisfactorily. Nevertheless, it is a very astonishing thing that now appears so clearly fraudulent could have escaped detection for so long a time. It will therefore be a surprise to Bible readers of today, who have had no suspicion of this deception, to be told that it was through the medium of the Irish language that the true key would be found for the solution of the mystery of the origin of the Bible. The proof of this fact is here to given for all mankind to see and know.
That's kind of how big the book was.
The first of the 2 citations to be given in this chapter is from the book of John, chapter 3, 23rd verse. Quote, And John was baptizing in Aenon near to Salem, because there was much water there, and they came and were baptized. In the latest revision of the Bible, the doctors have altered the word of Aenon and have made it Enon. In the older version, it is Aenon. This is a compound of 2 Irish words. Ain, meaning a circle of the sun, a year, and On, also a name of the sun. The complete word itself means the sun. The word On also signifies cause, reason, swiftness, fierceness, eagerness, excellent, noble, good, and also wolf dog. These are qualities and attributes associated with and applied to the solar sun. And to the sun god by the Aryan or Irish priest of Iessa, their theology was based on the idea that the supreme deity never had nor has a name. He is only known by attributes, as the good or God, holy most high, etc., and as the solar sun in the center of light. And his great representative, or sun, in our system, the sun god, is named after the qualities and attributes of some idea such as the horseman, or charioteer, the strong one, or Samson, or the fierce one, Homs, the heavenly wolf, who is eager, swift, and fierce. The Irish, during their sojourn in Egypt, gave the name of On to one of their cities in the Nile. The city of On, the city of the sun, was afterwards called Heliopolis by the Greeks and Romans, or actually the Phoenicians. Salem is a Hebrew word, but the basis of it is in the Irish word solas, light, as Hebrew is a jargon of the Irish. It follows more or less closely the root it is taken from, as will be seen. So Salem means the city of God or light. Let's continue. Quote, the meaning of this myth is that John, Ain, the sun, was baptizing in Aenon, the city of the sun, near to Salem, the city of God, in the realm of light, the celestial kingdom. Where else could such a being as the pure and perfected man be said to dwell? In this myth, John, Ain, Aeon, or Ein, three forms of the word and all pronounced Ein, represents the redeemed and glorified man at the highest stage of spiritual attainment, next to the messianic state, so that in his succeeding life or incarnation here again on earth, he will be the Messiah. In the Irish mythic narrative of the Bible, we see that after John, the prophet and the holy man, comes the perfected man God, the Messiah, Iesa, Jesus. Quote, this is an example of the esoteric truth and wisdom which lies hidden beneath the veil of the scriptural allegory as formulated by those inspired Irish adepts, and though they have been denied the credit of authorship through a thieves' compact of silence, their wisdom and their works still exist in both the Bible and the Great Pyramid of Iesa. Like I said, there's definitely more to go over, but this is a pretty big claim to cover in a single video. There's a lot to look at. But most of the confusion lies in that when the Jesuits took over the church, they added 1,000 years to our history, renamed many ancient historians, forged manuscripts, and changed the dating of everything to give this illusion that Rome was in power for 1,000 years longer than it really was. So the major point to take from this is that in the last 1,000 years, there was a major global civilization that made architectures around the world, and they didn't fall till about 200 to 300 years ago, maybe even more recent. A second cataclysm happened, not the flood, but something that caused this civilization to be destroyed.
Melting.
Then the Jesuit Catholic Church came in, took this knowledge, rewrote history, converted the system to their own system, and left out any ability for someone to gain this power through their own accord. They must reach God through the church. It wasn't like this in the Church of Iesa. Okay, so now we move on to King James. So supposedly he had a vision or whatever and was destined to create this English translation. This is still the same Jesuit system, but converted into a more Shakespearean presentation. Now there are multiple things to address. The first is the extreme likelihood, if not fact, that Francis Bacon was the main editor of the King James Bible. Notice how I didn't say create the Bible. I got a lot of comments on the Christian Origins series saying, oh, the Bible's far older than King James or Francis Bacon.
No
Obviously,
shit.
I'm stating that not only was he the main editor for the Bible, but was also Shakespeare. Francis was also the writer of the New Atlantis, where he imagined a technocratic, scientifically run society. He was an occultist that hid secret Rosicrucian symbols within the Bible.
Shakespeare helped rewrite.
The goal was to establish the church as a method for collecting all the esoterically inclined individuals, or those with connection to spirit, and put them in a mind trap in which they prayed to an unknown god and could only reach that metaphysical power through the church. They took the philosophy and virtues of ancient knowledge and integrated it into a powerful...
Why is that a Masonic symbol?
...ritual of spiritual tyranny. Now let's slow down there. That doesn't mean there isn't truth in the Bible, and that also doesn't mean that Jesus or a Jesus-type figure didn't exist. Okay? So let's bring up the Church of Iesa again. Remember, this was the original church. These old Tartarian churches from around the world are from these people. They were not originally designed to be praying centers where demons would suck your spiritual energy, but they were originally designed as sacred geometrical healing centers that would charge the aether body of man.
How many fucking times have I said that? I mean, you guys know because you've heard me over and over and over. But come on, how could I know this if this was supposedly history that didn't exist? When there's all these signs. And remember, sacred geometry is a huge word back in these times.
There's also this idea that they use these churches as spiritual transport systems in which they could rematerialize their bodies in different locations.
Whoop.
I've talked about how the society didn't eat meat and or food at all, since all these cities do not have proper sewer systems in their founding. The reason is because this civilization was on a different wave of spiritual consciousness and technology. Over time, other nations formed independent of this church and began plotting its demise. We see this come out of Rome with the Jesuits after they take over the world through some unfortunate circumstances, whether it be cataclysm, or the sun disappearing, or even some type of plasma apocalypse. You have the early Tartarian Age and the fall of Tartaria. The fall of the Tartarian Age is within the last 600 to 300 years, where there were many changes that took place. In the 1700s, California was an island on many maps. There's no possible way that this could be just an error if the history they tell us is true. There's also countless problems for the founding of many cities that many channels have covered the inconsistencies and pointed out that there's many things that don't really make sense. At some point, there was a steampunk type age in Europe and America, where aether-free energy technology was being used. This is not necessarily the technology of Tartaria, but after these empty cities of Tartaria were being filled, they began finding ancient advanced technology from the Church of Iessa. They found them in the churches, train stations, and are now called government buildings. These were re-engineered to develop many of the technologies that we use today. There were still leftover nations of Tartaria in this age, and it wasn't until 1812 that they had been fully conquered. Now, early Tartaria is within the last 1,000 years. This is at its prime. We hear about this in many of the myths around the world, where teachers came and taught the arts and sciences and fundamentals of civilization. They established their spiritual priesthood around the world. And look, I'm not really one of those zeitgeist guys, that brings up astrotheology and just says, Jesus never existed. I think he could have possibly been a druid. But this is ultimately the story of a spiritual helper who existed during this time of cataclysm to come and help others who were unaware of their spiritual power from within. Fomenko, which if you haven't heard of his work, suggests a completely different chronology than our modern timeline. He suggests that the dates for the Old Testament are actually of a much more chronology from cataclysm to come.
It's Apollonymous, but it's still Apollo, the sun god.
And help others who were unaware of their spiritual power from within. Fomenko, which if you haven't heard of his work, suggests a completely different chronology than our modern timeline. He suggests that the dates for the Old Testament are actually of a much more recent time, and it is the New Testament that is actually of a more ancient origin. Maybe it's possible that Francis Bacon and other Jesuit occultists of the New World decided to create the Bible in such a cryptic and spiritually influencing spell that would ban humans from using magic or pursuing spiritual enlightenment for themselves. Maybe they thought that this was the best way to protect humanity from another cataclysm. As I mentioned with Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis, they wanted to create a scientifically run society or tyranny that will be the New Atlantis. It won't fall and fail like the last one. Was that the goal? Well, how would they accomplish that? Well, they would just completely remove magic from the picture. Yeah, but we can't just take it away. It's not something physical. It's a natural right and process of reality. You have to relabel it and give another solution. The solution was, all you have to do is believe in Jesus and you will be spiritually saved. Don't go through the work and training of mind that is required to go through such an ancient, sacred tradition of understanding and knowing God. All you need is this physical book and Jesus, and you will have everything you need. For many, that's true. And there's no intention to take that away from you. However, if we look at the tyranny of the church and the removal of knowledge of the past age of the church, we see a deliberate attempt to remove ancient knowledge from passing on into this next age. The ancient knowledge is the perception of the world, it's the cosmology of the past. They needed to remove this concept that God is actually within man. This is the foundation for how the original church had practiced their philosophy, and it was not seen as blasphemous at all. Many advanced intellectual minds were created from this ancient philosophy of spiritual planes, and faculties resulted from their practice. Modern examples of magic include Satanism, which has nothing to do with the ancient tradition. They just have radicalized a compressed and oversimplified version of magic for evil and sometimes simply for cultural influence. New Ageism is the wokeness in spirituality. Things like the secret law of attraction or these cringy occult stores that are trying to sell spirituality to you. They have made occult knowledge look like a joke in the modern day. Then you have these elite cabal Luciferians, if you want to call them that, or who are taking part in magic. So, is magic evil? No. First off, if it wasn't for many of these individuals, I'm not sure we would know anything about the occult. Sure, I think many of these individuals partook in spreading propaganda to a degree, but let's just take Manly P. Hall for example. Now, there are some weird things about his story for sure, and he was a high-ranking Freemason or whatever, but that by no means takes away the knowledge presented in his works. You can call him evil, you can say he's elite, But until you actually read his works,
Look at that, the Earth's
you'll
flat.
find it's just not the case. Magic is not only the ability to make change in the real world through different practices and the implications that follow, such as the cosmology of mind over matter, but it's the foundation for spiritual practice and enlightenment. We shouldn't avoid it simply because we see different elite figures who want to use it for control. If anything, it might be the only way to escape tyranny is to reclaim our natural-born magical powers and consciousness. Magic is a tool. You use it on a daily basis. If you're a Christian, you do it unconsciously. Praying is a form of magic. You're wishing for something to happen through a ritual of asking God in some form of repetitive mantra. Any type of hope thinking or belief is a form of magic. Speaking in tongues, baptism, candle lighting, the Eucharist, bell ringings are just some examples of Christian magic. Magic also includes the realm of natural magic, sprites, nature forces, fairies, as above, so below. These are natural foundations for the way our reality works. You can't just take that away, and you can't just claim it's evil. So, why would you want to do magic? Well, if you're asking that, you must mean consciously, as it's a part of the way this realm works, and it's a natural process within our consciousness. Why would you want to do conscious magic? To develop faculties for more inner awareness, spiritual astral journeys during dreaming, intuition, guidance, knowledge, and or developing the self and influencing creativity. It is the influence of the genius. Hopefully soon we can change our perspective on magic to preserve it for generations to come. Assist in this process by liking, subscribing, maybe even tell a friend. And all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the
Yeah. I love this stuff, guys. Honestly, I really do. Especially when I watch more and more and these different people that are making the videos. And you see they all have a common facts. They have common facts. That in the modern history of the world, that they will look like you stupid. And they'll put you in asylums. And then they'll medicate you till it all disappears. But, you know, if you're easily brainwashed, or you don't want to think outside the box, because thinking outside the box, it scares people. Because they don't want to be labeled. But history, whether this is true or not, and we know which side of this I lean towards, because there's just way too much proof that says it's like, how do I say that? There's way too much proof to where it can't be wrong. There you go. Can't be false. Anyway, I'm not telling y'all how to think. Basically, what I did today was, I was just telling you to think. I showed you some. Well, Mind Unveiled. I like this guy. He's some of his stuff. It can go drag on forever and super dry, like John Levy. Every once in a while, you can watch him in short bursts, and I like his videos. Like I said, he does a lot of in depth, so you get a broader view of what it was like then. Well, hopefully, what it will be like in the future. You know, since we have the technology that they had back then. But I hope y'all enjoy the show. Go ahead and back to your regularly scheduled drama panels, and